It's time, Cougar Nation. Cougar Tracks. The best season analysis with BYU insider Mitch Harper on KSL NewsRadio and on video every day on the YouTube page for KSL Sports.
Welcome into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube and KSL NewsRadio. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. It's a Tuesday edition of Cougar Tracks. We're only 3 days away until BYU takes on West Virginia. Kickoff on Friday night, General Conference weekend, 8:30 p.m. on KSL News Radio and ESPN. Pre-game coverage begins at 6:30. So no Cougar Tracks, of course, on Friday night on KSL News Radio. You'll still get the game day podcast feed on the KSL Sports YouTube and on audio feed as well. And right now, let's dive into that BYU West Virginia matchup here in our top story of the day.
The top story of the day. The biggest story in the world of BYU sports right here on Cougar Tracks.
West Virginia is coming into Provo, first time ever. They're limping into Provo. They're 2-3 on the season, 0-2 in Big 12 play, and they have been hammered in their first two Big 12 games. Last week, they lost to Utah 48-14. They lost to Kansas 2 weeks prior, 41-10. It's the return of Rich Rodriguez as the head coach of the Mountaineers, and he's a great coach, and Rich Rod will get it turned around eventually, I think. I believe they will for the Mountaineers, but right now they're not competitive in the Big 12, and they got a lot of questions at their quarterback situation. Nico Marchiol has been banged up and is not expected to play. He's still dealing with a foot injury, recovering down in Arizona. So they got four different quarterbacks. Could be Jalen Henderson, who started against Utah, Khalil Wilkins, who gave West Virginia a little bit of a spark against the Utes in the second half. They got a guy in Scotty Fox Jr., Max Brown, a Florida and Charlotte transfer. This was Kalani Sitake on the quarterback situation with West Virginia and trying to prep for these Mountaineers and what they bring at the quarterback spot.
I guess we have to prepare for all of them. You know, and they've used a bunch of quarterbacks. They all have stats, and so it's not easy. But we have to prepare for all of them, and I think if you can look at maybe even for us to assume we're going to see certain looks for different guys, but if you look at all the quarterbacks, they're all athletic. They can run, they can throw, and they know the system. So it's going to be really difficult. But regardless of who we face, we need to make sure our guys are assignment sound on our end, but and that we tackle well.
Regardless, with whoever's at quarterback for West Virginia, I'd be stunned if they have much success through the air. Their passing offense is 106 nationally in college football, gaining 179 yards through the air. Their rushing offense is where it's their bread and butter. They're 22nd nationally in rush offense, averaging 216 yards on the ground. The Mountaineers have to have success on the ground if they have any chance of being competitive with BYU. And speaking of work on the ground, BYU's got some questions in their backfield. LJ Martin, of course, is the star for the Cougars. And last week against Colorado, LJ, I don't want to say struggled, but man, Colorado put a lot of resources into stopping LJ. They stacked the box. That opened things up for Bear Bachmeier to have a night where Bear ended up with 98 yards on the ground. LJ, 15 carries, 58 yards. You know, maybe it's a little bit eyebrow raising when you consider Colorado had such a bad rush defense. You're thinking, what gives? But again, they put a lot of resources, they being the Buffs, into stopping LJ. And BYU took what the defense was giving them. So I thought it was the right move running Bear as much as they did. But Kalani was asked about the backup running back situation after LJ Martin, because after LJ, in terms of the running backs, only one carry between Enoch Nawahine and Preston Rex, who had a brief cameo appearance in the game. This was Kalani on the running back depth for the Cougars.
Whether the storm of not having a running back
just
in there?
being a little bit thin at running back.
Yeah, we're fine. We got guys that can run the ball. And so, that's you just don't know about them yet. But there's guys that are capable of running the ball and guys that can play with LJ, whether it's Enoch Nawahine or Preston Rex or Logan Payne, Jovesto Tamuni. There's a lot of guys that we feel good about in that room, and they're probably just not common names, and maybe you guys haven't heard about them, but they're super talented, and they'll make their mark. And a lot of you guys didn't know much about Sione Moa before either, so I trust Harvey Unga as a running back coach, and Fessy and A-Rod and TJ Woods there, so we'll be fine.
Kalani Sitake very confident about the running back situation moving forward for BYU. I do think they'll be okay, but it is a little bit thin at that spot, obviously, with the absence of Sione Moa. That's pretty significant for the Cougars. But I will say, to his point about the lesser-known guys, I think if you do dig into those players, Logan Payne's very interesting to me. He was someone I was talking quite a bit about in spring ball and a little bit to a lesser degree in fall camp. So, Kalani, I'm well aware of Logan Payne. I think Logan Payne's got a bright future ahead at BYU. I think Enoch Nawahine is solid, but it is interesting that BYU just didn't turn to those guys at all. But Nawahine, of course, got that big conversion for the Cougars in that win over Colorado. And Preston Rex, I'm curious to see if they dial up anything for Preston Rex, because there were moments in fall camp. Again, Preston is a former safety, really good athlete out of San Clemente, younger brother to Isaac Rex. His dad played at BYU, tight end great Byron Rex. Preston could give a spark, I think, for BYU's backfield. But again, he just hasn't really done it. It's kind of a mystery a little bit, but Sione Moa was a mystery, to Kalani's point, last year, and then he broke onto the scene. But we did see signs in fall camp last year of how good Sione Moa can be. It was just kind of against the third-team defense or, some, at best, second team. Similar situation in the case of Preston Rex, who got some opportunities and got some run. I thought he had some nice runs in camp. A little bit of sometimes ball security issues. I remember there was a little bit of a juggle when he had an exchange there. But I think BYU will be okay, but you ultimately got to keep LJ Martin healthy. But we also have to acknowledge, too, that BYU utilizes their running backs, their wide receivers in the ground game, too. Jet sweeps with Parker Kingston, and Cody Hagan has been excellent on that tornado play for the Cougars. Still, despite the questions about the depth at running back, BYU still put up 208 yards on the ground against the Buffs. And I think they could do it again against West Virginia. Now, West Virginia's defense can be pretty good. They can get after teams. I think that, but they've been struggling. They're kind of beaten up right now, this whole West Virginia team. And then you factor in 2 time zone travel. It's not easy traveling out of Morgantown and then coming out west to another college town in Provo. So it's not easy to make that work. I think that BYU could really pounce on West Virginia early in this game and get those big runs from LJ Martin, as we kind of grew accustomed to in the first quarter of the season, those first 3 weeks during non-conference play. But I think BYU will be okay. It's just a little bit of a tightrope, but Kalani expressed confidence in those running backs moving forward. Let's take a break. On the other side, you'll get to know the foe. Let's learn about the West Virginia Mountaineers from an insider who covers WVU. It's Cougar Tracks here on KSL News Radio and the KSL Sports YouTube page. BYU football is getting ready for a Friday night matchup at home at LaVell Edwards Stadium against the West Virginia Mountaineers. First time West Virginia is making the trip to Provo. And to get an insider look at the West Virginia Mountaineers, I'm joined now by Keenan Cummings, managing editor of WVSports.com, part of On3 and Rivals. Keenan, you and I go way back. We talked years ago, back in 2016, when these two teams met in a non-conference game out in Washington, D.C. and Landover, Maryland. Now it's a conference game, and the Mountaineers are coming out to Provo. I appreciate you hopping on board, man.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's crazy how much college football has changed. It seemed weird, that game even being a neutral site game back then. And now these two teams, they're conference mates. College football continues to change.
It really does. And there's been a lot of change even since the last meeting between these two teams, where I remember 2 years ago in Morgantown, BYU looked down and out. I mean, they looked like a team that in program that was struggling with the physicality in the Big 12. West Virginia ran wild on BYU, and West Virginia was a really good football team that year. And now BYU, 2 years later, 4-0, nationally ranked. West Virginia going through a little bit of challenging times in year one under Rich Rod. Maybe give us an assessment, Keenan, how we got here to this point with West Virginia and Rich Rod.
Well, I think that at the end of last season, it was abundantly apparent that West Virginia needed to make a change. I have nothing negative to say about Neil Brown, the person, but when it comes to football coach, he wasn't getting it done. I think he was 37 and 34, over his 6 years over top of the program. So West Virginia conducted a national search that led to Rich Rodriguez. There were some other candidates involved, but eventually Rich obviously got the job. He inherited a program that really has undergone a ton of change. When I say completely new roster, I mean it. West Virginia brought in 80-some new players. Most of their starters from last year on both sides of the ball are gone, either from graduation or the transfer portal. And, that's the nature of the beast in today's college game. When you have change, things are going to happen. It was a very senior-laden team that kind of disappointed last year for West Virginia. So Rich had to go in and rebuild this thing really pretty much from the bottom up. And that's hard to do in 1 year, especially when you're looking at the offensive line. I think West Virginia lost, it was 7 of their top 8 offensive linemen from last year. That's just really hard to overcome. And you're seeing some of that. The offensive line had played better. It gotten better every game until the last 2. They've really struggled, once they got into Big 12 play. And I think that's a concern. But, it's a process. I think that everyone understands that. West Virginia struggled probably more offensively than people would have expected, given some of those concerns. And then they've had a rash of injuries, too. Pretty much, I would say they've lost their starting quarterback for periods of time. Their best player on offense, their starting running back. They've lost some of those offensive linemen that were already replacing guys. They've lost their best or arguably best wide receiver. So it's been a challenge.
That's a lot to unpack there. With all that in mind, you kind of look at this year then almost like a year zero in a way that just get West Virginia to take steps forward over the course of this year, have expectations kind of recalibrated now with an 0-2 Big 12 start and 2-3 overall record.
That year zero thing is almost kind of a dirty word around here because that was what was really thrown around under Neil Brown, in the first year. So I'm not going to say that. Rich isn't going to say that either. I think the one thing that he's kind of said from the start, whether it's realistic or not, but for appearance sake, is, they're trying to win this season. That's why they rebuilt the roster. That's why they were so aggressive. I mean, I think when you look at it realistically, there's going to be some challenges. And, this was already a roster that was dealing with some issues in terms of talent. And then you're taking a lot of that talent away, either by injuries or, guys not being able to play. So it's going to make it tough. I do think that the expectation is for West Virginia still to compete better than they have the last 2 games. I think anybody in the Pliskar Center, anybody in that locker room will tell you that. They had played, they didn't play necessarily great in a loss to Ohio, but they had chances to win that game. They were able to rally and beat their rival Pitt. They were down 10 in the fourth quarter, played pretty well in that game, especially late to come back and win that. And then the last 2, they've been outscored 45.5 to 12. I mean, that's just not going to cut it. And I think everyone's aware of that, and everyone's aware of the challenges, but it's more about getting out there and putting together a better product on the field.
Keenan Cummings with WVSports.com, part of the Rivals and On3 network, is my guest. And I think you brought up that win over Pitt in overtime in the backyard brawl. Coach Rich Rod had an animated on-field post-game interview saying, God bless the Mountaineers. Where do you think that emotion came from? What did Coach Rich Rod tell you guys as in the media as to what maybe inspired that moment on the field after that backyard brawl? Because for our listeners that are Cougar fans, Rich Rod's back. I mean, he had that great stint the first time around. What do you think inspired those comments?
Well, I think it was kind of 17 years in the making. Rich, obviously, the way he left in 2007, all the drama that followed after that. He's joked he's kind of like Forrest Gump. He's been all over the country, in the bayou, in the desert, all these different places. And to end up back at West Virginia at this stage of his career and then to win a game like that in an environment that was that emotionally charged, I think it sometimes gets the best of you a little bit. Rich isn't really, I don't want to say he's not an emotional guy because he is. It's just usually he's yelling at people, but he's not that type of guy typically. I think it was really just the scene, the way that stadium was set out. Really, it was kind of a culmination. The last game that Rich coached here was against Pittsburgh. So I think that it was kind of a full circle moment. And the way that they were able to come back and win that game, I think there was a lot of pride there because that's what he's talked about, since he got back here. They're going to play with a hard edge. They're going to play tough. They're going to be physical. They're not going to quit. And that game kind of embodied that. They rallied, kind of looked dead in the water there in the fourth quarter and just rallied down 10 and was able to win in overtime.
And when I think of Rich Rod teams, I always think of having a lot of pride at that quarterback position and developing great quarterbacks. I know there's been a little bit of in and out at QB and trying to figure things out at getting ready for this Friday night game against BYU. What do you make of kind of the quarterback situation for West Virginia this week, Keenan, with Nico Marchio and you got Khalil Wilkins, Jalen Henderson last week got the start. Like, what do you kind of make of this whole quarterback situation heading into BYU week?
Yeah, Rich said at the start of the year that he had 5 quarterbacks that he felt good about, and they were all going to play. True to his word, through 5 weeks, all 5 guys have played. Multiple quarterbacks have played every single game this season. Nico Marchio did not play against Utah. He has a foot issue. He had to fly out to Colorado to see a specialist. I do not know his status right now. He obviously didn't play last weekend, so that's something to watch. West Virginia started Jalen Henderson in that game. Didn't go too well. Turned to Khalil Wilkins, a redshirt freshman. He gave him some spark. I'll be interested to see if that was enough for him to earn more time. Rich has not been bashful over the years that if you go out there and you play well, you have a chance to play. So I think that, obviously the game was a little bit different at that point. West Virginia was kind of being thoroughly beaten on the scoreboard, but he did come out and provide some juice. Some things offensively that the Mountaineers did not show at all previously to that. So I think of all the quarterbacks that have played outside Marchio, that was probably the most optimistic. But the thing is, every game that seemed to change. Against Kansas, a similar thing happened with Jalen Henderson. He came into the game for a struggling Marchio and really gave the offense some juice. So it'll be interesting to see. I think there's a lot of different ways you can go here. But I think if I'm betting on something, you're going to probably see more than one quarterback this week.
What do you think is the strength of this West Virginia team right now that you got the most confidence in through 5 games?
I would have said the defense until last week. I thought West Virginia played pretty well defensively under first-year coordinator Zach Alley. West Virginia, Rich Rodriguez made that a point. He wanted to go out and get a big-time defensive coordinator. They were able to lure him away from Oklahoma. He was calling plays there, and West Virginia's defense had played pretty well. Even against Kansas, I know the scoreboard looks a little awkward, but they gave up a kick return touchdown in that game, and the offense did nothing. So the defense was on the field most of the game. Had a few busts that kind of led to an awkward, kind of crooked scoreboard, but I thought that overall, they battled. This past week was not their best. Utah kind of cut them up from start to finish. I think they scored 5 touchdowns on their first 6 drives. This was not what this defense has shown. They were missing a lot of tackles. I think they missed 24, 25 tackles in the game. And that's been an issue at times, but not to that degree. So it's really kind of, to me, was that a one-off? Was that kind of more what Utah was able to do to them? Because obviously they have a very big physical offensive line. West Virginia struggled to get pressure. And when they brought pressure, it felt like Utah was kind of throwing to those vacated areas or attacking those areas. So was that a one-off against a really physical team with a defensive line, or are there some cracks of things to expose? But if I had to pick one thing, it would be that. Secondly would probably be, Ty Edwards played really well against Pitt, and we haven't seen him since. He rushed the ball in one game this year against Pitt. He rushed for 140 some yards and 3 touchdowns, and he's been dealing with a hip pointer. He gives this offense a different element without Jaheim White. So if he's in there, I think it makes a difference offensively. But if he can't go, West Virginia's really struggled to find a running back, because last week they played Utah without Jaheim White, who's their starter, out for the year, without Edwards, who's their backup. He missed the game. And then Sincere Bowers was their third team guy, and he also missed the game due to concussion. So they're still trying to figure some things out.
Here with Keenan Cummings for a few more moments, talking West Virginia football as the Cougars get set to host West Virginia Friday night, 8:30 p.m. on ESPN and KSL NewsRadio. What do you make of that, Keenan? Just 10:30 p.m. Eastern time, kickoff for the Mountaineers body clock. It's got to be the latest game in West Virginia history.
I think they had one more that was around that time. I think it might have been 10:15, 10:30. They played Arizona State in a bowl game. I think it was in 2016, maybe. So maybe around. It was during the Dana Holgorsen era. Skylar Howard was the quarterback. They played Arizona State. I think that game ended at like 2 a.m. So definitely different for an East Coast. But I mean, that's what you get. When you have these leagues that you want to stretch coast to coast, if you want to have this type of impact in terms of reaching people, I mean, that's part of the price. And I think that you're not going to have very many West Virginia fans that are going to be happy about this. But also, you kind of get the same thing when some of those teams from out west come here and play at noon. So, it's just part of the process. I think, personally, do I want to be up till 6, 7 in the morning writing? No, but it'll be fun.
Last thing for you, Keenan. If West Virginia is going to make this a competitive game and try to pull off the upset against BYU, and I know a lot of it gets kind of determined by these player availability reports coming throughout the week, and we'll get more on that as the week goes along, but just kind of your overarching thoughts, like what's it going to take for the recipe for success for West Virginia against BYU, who has kind of a similar defense to Utah in terms of scheme and philosophy, with Kalani Sitake being from that Coach Whittingham tree. What do you think it's going to take?
Well, West Virginia's got to be able to run the football. I think it starts and stops there. When this offense has looked good, they've been able to run the football, and they need better play from their offensive line. It would do wonders if they had a healthy Ty Edwards or somebody that's willing to kind of get those yards. I'll be interested to see, who plays quarterback and how that affects the offense. Khalil Wilkins is the most athletic of the group, so he gives you a little bit of an element there, but it's a redshirt freshman, so that's going to be asking a lot if he gets the start. But you got to be able to run the football. You got to be able to protect the football. If those two things happen, I think West Virginia can at least potentially start to put some things together. Now, defensively, you just have to have a better effort. If West Virginia has a similar effort to what you saw a week ago, they're going to struggle to win games in this league. It's simple as that. It's not a good combination if you're struggling offensively and defensively. So they need the defense to kind of get back to what it had been, through the first 3.5, 4 games of the season. And offensively, control the ball, control tempo. It's hard to control tempo the way Richard Rodriguez wants to do if you can't get first downs. And if you're going 3 and out, that ain't going to work.
He's Keenan Cummings, managing editor for WVSports.com, part of the Rivals and On3 network. You can follow him on X at Rivals. Keenan, appreciate the time to get the insight into the West Virginia Mountaineers. No one does it better than you. Check out his bylines on WVSports.com and look forward to your coverage this week.
Appreciate it.
Big thanks to Keenan Cummings for joining me on the show. I've got to know Keenan since that game in 2016 when BYU as an independent took on West Virginia in FedEx Field in Landover, Maryland. So gotten to know him quite some time. And I always say this to people, BYU has followed the Big 12 for years. Myself included, in my job, I was following the Big 12 for years because I always knew that the Big 12 was the perfect fit power conference-wise for BYU. So when BYU stepped into this league, I knew a lot of people that were covering this league in the trenches, covering these teams, and giving their valuable insight. And Keenan gave a great breakdown of the West Virginia Mountaineers. And again, Friday night, BYU hosts the Mountaineers, 8:30 p.m. kickoff. It's going to be a late one at Lavelle Edwards Stadium. We'll see how the weather holds up as we get closer to kickoff this Friday night. But Cougs and Mountaineers, first time ever in Provo. BYU's looking for their first ever win against West Virginia. They're 0-2 in the previous matchups, and both matchups, of course, have taken place in the Kalani Sitake era. That will do it for today's edition of Cougar Tracks. I hope all of you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to the show on the KSL Sports YouTube page. Like this video. Subscribe on the audio feeds. Leave a 5-star rating and a review. It helps out the show a ton. I will talk to you tomorrow here on Cougar Tracks as we dive deeper into BYU and West Virginia, and also Big 12 basketball power rankings coming up tomorrow on the show as well. This has been Cougar Tracks on KSLSports.com and KSL News Radio.